Well, first off, I'd like to welcome all who are attending our master plan update, our virtual open house. Certainly COVID-19 has done a lot of things and changed our world in a lot of different ways. And one of the ways is, of course, the way that we engage with our public. And so we thank you for taking the time to meet with us. I'm going to put that in air quotes in this virtual manner. What this is all about is, of course, back in 2003, the Arapahoe County voters approved a sales and use tax, which really talked about the funding of parks, trails, and open space, environmental projects, wildlife protection, all of that mainly focused in on outdoor recreation. All of that was the result of this open space sales and use tax. And then, of course, it was renewed because it was a 10-year sunset. It was renewed in 2011. And so both on overwhelming margins in regards to the support. Now, that sales and use tax was 0.25%. In other words, it's 25 cents for every $100 of sales tax that's happened within Arapahoe County is dedicated towards the open spaces or this outdoor recreation program. And this program is somewhat unique in a sense that there's quite a bit of it that gets shared right back into the community. 50% of the money that we receive gets shared with our cities, towns, and special districts that, cities and towns, and 12% is through a competitive grant program. And so what that means is that even though it's the Arapahoe County portion of the open space sales and use tax, the properties that we have, the trails that we are responsible for, it's somewhat limited, and we'll show this on this particular map. It's still a county-wide program. In other words, parts of this money goes to each of the communities, special districts that provide outdoor recreation within Arapahoe County. But tonight, we're going to be focused in on one aspect of this program, and that is the properties and the trails that the county is responsible for. And I'd like to just draw your attention to the screen, which really focuses in on all of the various properties that the county particularly owns. And so all the green circles kind of really highlight the various properties. We own properties such as the Wabash Trailhead, which is along the Cherry Creek corridor, Longs Pine Grove, which is one of our newest park properties. Again, this is along the Highline Canal. We've got property that's along the Cherry Creek corridor, as well as properties that are out east. For example, it mentions in the N and O timeframe, that's the Arapahoe County Fairgrounds, which is part of our program. We also have eastern properties, both in the Bennett area, both the Kiowa North and Kiowa South. That's along the Kiowa Creek drainage area. We also have a pretty large property. This is the Middle Bijou, as well as the Mule Gulch properties. Those properties are mainly focused in on agricultural development and keeping in ag production. The furthest east is the Deer Trail property, which is called Rich Mill Ranch. And again, these are the various properties that are owned and managed and operated by the Arapahoe County Open Spaces program. And you can ask that question, have you experienced some of these places? I mentioned about the Longs Pine Grove. There's a nice little picture of it. That's, again, one of our newest properties. We also operate a couple of historic or heritage properties. One is the 17 Mile House Farm Park. Now, that is a historic property. The house actually dates back into the late 1800s. We've basically restored it to a period of significance in the 30s and 40s. We've had a couple of events out there that's been very, very popular. That is the 17 Mile House Fall Festival. Here's a couple of pictures of some of the other open spaces. I mentioned about the Rich Mill Ranch, which in the upper portion of the ranch, you can really see the I-70 corridor all the way out to the Front Range. Great, fantastic views. Kiowa Creek South open space, as well as the Bijou Basin open space. Again, places where wildlife roam. We see a lot of antelope, we see a lot of other types of wildlife. And so the program really is focused in on not only the urban area, but also in the eastern part of it. Now, as I mentioned, the sales and use tax was passed in 2003, and we started collecting, of course, money in 2004. And so since that time, we've participated in, helped fund over 73 miles of trails that have been built or improved. $15 million was, to give you a little bit of perspective, I mentioned about 50% of the money goes back to our cities and towns. Last year, that equated to $15.7 million. Since the beginning of the program, over 31,000 acres, including wildlife habitat, riparian corridors, agricultural land, all of that has been protected since the beginning of the program. We also mentioned the fact that we do maintain some properties that we own in fee simple, and we operate and manage. That's over pretty close to over 5,000 acres, 5,346 acres across 20 different parks, trails, and open spaces. So it's a good sized program. Some of the areas I'm sure that many in the audience perhaps knew that Arapahoe County was responsible for. Perhaps maybe that's a new fact that, well, I didn't know that Arapahoe County owned this portion. If you have any children that do any sports like baseball or soccer or football, and you've ever had a tournament or practice or perhaps a game at the Dove Valley Regional Park, that is also part of our system. So we run the gamut of active field recreation all the way out to our open spaces and deer trail. So that gives you a little bit of an overview of what our program is all about. And so the purpose of tonight is that back in 2009, we adopted a open space master plan. Well, it's 2020, and so it's time to really update or revise that open space master plan. And so what we've done is we've contracted with Design Workshop to help us out in our community outreach, to help do a number of different research projects to be able to get a better understanding in regards to what the future needs are and what the current needs are as far as our open space plan. And so this is part of it, asking the community for input into that process. And so what I'd like to do is introduce Anna Laburn. She's going to be kind of our host, and she's going to be leading the discussion about not only a presentation on what's been done so far and what some of the things that they've found out so far, but also being able to answer your questions, as she mentioned, probably towards the end. So let me turn it over to Anna.
Great. Thanks, Shannon. That was a great introduction to your program and what this master plan is about. I wanted to, we'll have an opportunity, a little bit for you to respond to some questions too as members of this meeting, and we'll turn that over in a little bit. But I wanted to start off by giving a little background about this master plan and why we're embarking upon this. So the 2010 Arapahoe County Open Spaces Master Plan is what's currently guiding the county, and most of that effort is complete that is outlined in that master plan. It's really an amazing effort that was put into to follow through on the vision and ideas and goals of the community that was outlined in 2010. And now with that completed, there's also been many changes in the county as well that need to be reflected on, as sometimes community values can shift over time, as well as different opportunities become available. So one of those key aspects to update in this plan is to really look at the acquisition strategy for the future of Arapahoe County Open Spaces. The county is strategic and transparent about the decision-making about areas to conserve through purchases of land, donations, or conservation easement agreements with willing property owners. So we're going to share some maps in a little bit that outline tonight what we've learned about those, all the opportunities throughout the county, what makes for great open space conservation. And the next step is really in prioritizing that, so the county can focus their attention on conserving land for the next 10 years to add to that 31,000 acres that have already been conserved since the program started in 2003. So we'll also look at number 2 here, providing recommendations for updating land use code and regulations to support the master plan goals. There's sensitive lands and water protection that often happens through land use codes, as well as looking at parks, open space, and trails being provided as the county grows and develops. So those are some efforts that are underway to provide those recommendations going forward. And as common in master plans like this, it's making sure that the county is properly stewarding and maintaining existing resources, and also gaining support for reauthorization of the program, as Shannon mentioned as well. I wanted to share where we're at in the process, because this is not the first time that we've gone out for public input. This is we're kind of in the middle of a process with the public engaged in a variety of ways. We started out in May with inventory and analysis of the current system, and evaluating what you have today as professionals in planning and design of parks and open space and trail systems. And the public engagement around that we call Ignite, and I'll share in a moment all the different aspects that have gone into listening to the county residents and other stakeholders in all of these steps. In May through October, we were in the stage of listening, of hearing about values, needs, resources, and vision. And the next part we'll move into after this is looking at more drill down into the strategies, priorities, and action plans, getting more into the details of what will help support those values and that vision. We're anticipating a draft plan to be available sometime in January of this next year that we'll be able to share out and get feedback and responses about. And then anticipating, after public review of that draft and refinement, May is our anticipated time frame for delivering a final master plan for adoption, which will include public hearings. So to date, we've heard from people in a whole variety of ways. I won't go into a lot of details about these, but the reports are available on the website if you want to learn more about any one of these. I think one of the most important ones that has brought out a lot of the groups that we've listened to is the public survey. So that has included signs in parks you may have seen, and along trails and at different properties, asking people to provide some feedback about what they think about the properties today. And that was in the spring. A statistically valid survey that was mailed to households that were randomly selected so that we could get a response throughout the entire county from folks, and making sure that it represented the demographics of the county, as well as an open-ended survey that was available online for anyone to take and widely advertised. The results of that are incredibly helpful for this plan, as well as efforts going forward of giving insight into what people value, their needs, and what they would like to see for the future. We've also had a number of different engagements with particular stakeholders that have a point of view that we need to understand directly from them. So that was some surveys, as well as interviews. We've engaged youth through a number of different ways as well to hear their perspective, as they often see our system differently and are thinking about the future differently. So that has been a positive add to the effort. As well as going forward, we've been doing some pop-up events this week in order to reach people, and those that may not call into a meeting like this, they're hearing about this as well in a few different avenues. What we want to direct you to in particular is the county website, where a number of the maps you'll see in this presentation and the number of exhibits and information and background is shared online, so that you can on your own time go through them, review information, and get some ideas from that as well to answer the public questionnaire. So that's a survey that we hope people will share far and wide, and are advertising it quite a bit to hear some feedback at this stage of the process regarding some initial framework of the plan that we're outlining in this presentation today. Lastly on that list we'll also have a heritage meeting with a group here in November that's scheduled in a couple of weeks. And then, as I mentioned, there's some upcoming things, but those are the near term. So I want to share just very briefly some of the common themes that we heard. So even though we had a survey that reached people in all different parts of the county that represented their needs, these were some things that were very distinct priorities that were across the board very popular. One of them was maintaining and improving what we have. There's very commonly the case that master plans need to respond to taking care of those assets you already have, and people have ideas about how to enhance them and improve them. Another one was protecting and restoring wildlife habitat, sensitive ecosystems, riparian or water corridors was really important to many people, as we saw in survey results as well as individual conversations with folks. A third one is continuing to provide new trail connections and recreation opportunities, which is probably no surprise considering we are in Colorado and that's what people are very interested in. And a fourth one, as I mentioned, we've heard from people throughout the county, and it was clear that there are distinct priorities between urban and rural geographies, between east, central, and west parts of the counties. And so this plan is intended to reflect those different priorities, not just that it's across the board one idea of what needs to happen. We're not averaging everything out. We're certainly listening to in all these different areas. And lastly was improving awareness and communication. There were many things that we were surprised people had not heard about or didn't know about already. They were very interested to learn this. And so the plan will outline how better improving awareness and communicating out will occur. So those are some common ones, and I wanted to highlight just a few of the survey responses that we found really interesting. One of them is when we asked people about their favorite outdoor activities in Arapahoe County, enjoying nature and wildlife was #1. Online survey participants, 78% gave us that response and 67% from the statistically valid survey. I bring that up because it's kind of unusual in the Front Range. Typically trails dominate this, and we see that being the #1 thing. So the fact that people enjoy nature and wildlife and they want to see that support going forward is a very important tenet for us to carry forward in the plan. The other things about spending time with family and friends and how to support social interactions in safe ways, certainly during this time of COVID, that has been something we've seen also come up over and over again in a lot of the write-in results. Something you'll see in this presentation is that we're focusing also on that acquisitions plan going forward and where to conserve or protect lands. #1 for people was preventing development of environmentally sensitive or special areas. It's really important, and equally providing wildlife habitat and ecological conservation was important. Sort of third below that, but still of importance to folks, was conserving agricultural and ranch lands and providing easy access to places for people to spend time in nature. So those are some top highlights of that survey, and I certainly invite you, if you're interested, to look at the website if you want to learn some more about those results that we heard from folks. But what we will be covering in this master plan based on what we've heard are a few key things. The objectives of prioritizing land acquisitions, expanding the open space program's reach in both geographic means as well as how we communicate with folks, generating public support for the renewal of the dedicated sales tax, and building the next generation of leaders and environmental stewards to see the next 10 years what this can look like. So from that, we've started to flush out a few focus areas for the plan. And Chris is going to walk through those in a moment here. They are access and awareness, trails and recreation, conservation, and programming and education.
Great. Well, thanks, Anna, and thanks everybody for being on the call tonight. Again, we're going to walk through the focus areas, and just as a heads up, want to give a plug to the story map and the questionnaire that is available on the county's website, and really is a companion to tonight's presentation, where we're going to ask some questions about priorities that I'll start to kind of look at here, but you can find out more information again on the story map, which really starts to describe in clear terms the system and some of the priority areas that we're looking at. So The first focus area that we want to talk about is access and awareness. I think we learned during the survey that there is some uncertainty about what Arapahoe County Open Spaces does, where they are, how people are encouraged to interact with the lands that they control. So when we talk about access and awareness, we did want to put out a plug for this idea that soon portions of some open spaces that currently aren't accessible to the community will be open for public access in the future. Planning is being done around North Kiowa Creek open spaces, South Kiowa Creek, to include activities such as hiking and biking, picnicking, equestrian opportunities, and agricultural education. There are other sections that are going to be preserved as conservation areas or for quality wildlife habitat. But again, some of the properties will be made available to the public in the near term. Second focus area is trails and recreation. And we're going to break this down into both trails and recreation because they don't function necessarily the same way. So the map you see on your screen is a map you'll see in the story map presentation that is linked to in the chat box. As we looked at the results of the public engagement over the summer, it really became clear that there are priorities that the public has that are listed along the left-hand side of the screen to make future trail investments to fill the gap in the trail network. Obviously, we want to make sure that where trails are disconnected, especially those regionally important trails, that we find opportunities to connect them. That we extend the regional trail system. Again, I think the Arapahoe County Bike and Ped Master Plan really talks about this, and the Arapahoe County Open Spaces Master Plan will support those findings. That we reach residents of developing communities in rural areas. We know that we have growth around developing communities near Bennett, near Watkins, Strasburg, so making sure that we're getting people access to trails. And then include natural area corridors surrounding trails where possible. I think one thing as we've seen is that people like to be in nature. So if you can be on a trail in nature, that might be more interesting than being on a trail that really doesn't have a lot of open space or natural areas around it. So I think,
Chris,
go ahead.
Why don't we move to the questions for the audience within this slide so that we can have that reaction to this map? And what I meant to say is Q&A at the end will hold the audience questions until then that are other than that. But we did prepare for folks some questions related to these maps you'll see appear on your screen. And I think as you're viewing them, it might be easiest to respond to these. But they're somewhat like our online survey that you'll find a questionnaire available through the county website. We'll share that at the end. But this helps us get an idea of, for those that are joining this meeting and on this call, those aspects that you are looking for. So you'll see a question in front of you about, besides hiking and biking trails, what are the specific facilities you feel Arapahoe County Open Spaces should add or increase the next 5 years throughout the county? So if you want to select one of those and hit submit, we'll see everyone's response that's a part of this meeting.
It looks like about a half of you have responded.
You can see the last option is if you have some other ideas, you can write them into the chat dialogue for us. Okay.
On your screen now, you should see the results of that survey, and we'll live share these out throughout the presentation so you can see what your neighbors and other people on the call are prioritizing. It looks like here some specific facilities that everyone on the call are very excited about possibly adding in the future are peaceful wildlife viewing areas, which we'll discuss later in this presentation, as well as other trailhead amenities such as parking, restrooms, and water fountains. If you have anything that's not a part of some of these options, if you chose the other, feel free to put that in the chat box. I see we have one vote for nature play in there, and we'll discuss that a little bit further as we dive into some programming options as well.
All right, moving along. Recreation priorities. What we've heard again from public outreach is that the community would like to see investments that create nature opportunities in urban areas. I think that kind of goes back to nature play, but it also really aligns with what we heard from the majority of residents, and that nature is important to the residents of Arapahoe County. That investments should maintain existing park infrastructure, important to always maintain what we have. That investments support developing communities with parks and open space to make sure that new communities have access to open spaces around them, and to ensure that investments enhance and maintain existing parks, trails, and public open spaces. As the map on the screen shows some of the potential recreation priority areas that we may consider in the western part of the county, and the more urban part of the county, the priorities around filling quarter-mile urban parks gaps with small parks and pockets of nature. In the central part of the county, again, around Bennett and Watkins, supporting parks and open space for new communities, and then adding existing recreation adding recreation amenities to existing open spaces in the eastern part of the county. Heather, did you have a question to share on this one?
No, this one is still aligned with the trails.
Thank you. So the third focus area is conservation, and we've heard of conservation in three different areas. One being wildlife habitat, important to the community. So the conservation efforts really want to protect habitat connectivity. You can see on this map that we're not looking at very distinct areas, but rather areas that do provide a connected habitat for our wildlife. Help maintain the health of wildlife species such as the pronghorn mule, white-tailed deer, and migratory birds. So looking at some of the priorities, and again, the questionnaire, you'll be able to respond to some of these ideas about where we want to preserve and why. Maintaining wildlife habitat in the urban areas, really connected to Cherry Creek State Park, and then to the south. In the central county, preserving wildlife corridors and habitat in the central and eastern, and then maintaining large areas of existing intact wildlife habitat in the eastern part of the county. Riparian corridors are a second kind of focus area under conservation. And what we heard were conservation really should help to protect the floodplain from development and erosion. That protects not only the riparian corridors, but all the wildlife habitat and biodiversity around those. Maintaining high water quality along with our watersheds, and preserving corridors for people and wildlife to enjoy. So again, you'll see a common theme in like the connection of corridors and preservation potentially of prioritizing these water corridors in both the urban and the more rural areas of the county. And then the third is agriculture. We heard in the survey that a focus on agriculture, conservation, and working agricultural lands is really important to the ethos of the Arapahoe County residents. So the focus here is really to direct conservation to support heritage and productive lands, to add to a larger contiguous system of open space, to connect the regional parks and trail networks, again, through preserved lands, and to protect ecological corridors. One thing I'll point out on this map is that, again, the green dots in places are Arapahoe County parks and open spaces. The red areas are agricultural and prairie conservation easements that exist today. So you can see where that conserved land is for agricultural purposes or prairie conservation. And then finally, we have this open space priority combined map, which really does combine all four of the focus areas to help understand where we might begin to think about priority areas. One thing I would like to point out is the yellow really represents an overlap of where all those previous maps identified potential locations for preservation. So if you go to the questionnaire, you will be able to locate on this map specific areas that you think deserve priority for acquisition or conservation. So please do participate in that questionnaire. It's going to provide us valuable information about not only what, but where we think priorities should be located. And then our fourth focus area is really around programming and education. And You know, for those who don't know, the county does a great amount of work in providing both access to educational opportunities, but also the, you know, historic and cultural resources that really speak to the history and culture of Arapahoe County. So what we heard from the community is really, you know, the priorities to direct future efforts to programming for environmental and natural resources, for history and culture, and for agriculture. Creating a stronger emphasis on environmental education, stewardship, and visitor services, and linking programs and services with other facilities that have a physical connection to open spaces, trails, and other facilities. You can see just a small list of some of the programs and groups that do actual programming and education within Arapahoe County Open Spaces on the screen, and some of the parks and open spaces that hold those activities. So we'll leave this question up on the screen again a little bit longer. I wish Arapahoe County would provide more opportunities to participate in which of these activities, which appeals most to you.
And it looks like a little over half of you have voted. So I'm going to go ahead and share these results with the group. So again, you can see what everyone on the call is thinking. And so it looks like, based off of the results here, there's strong support for some more opportunities around historical and cultural festivals, especially leveraging a lot of those assets that Chris mentioned, like the 17-mile house and the fairgrounds. And then there's also a lot of support for playgrounds, especially nature play and some environmental and agricultural education.
Great. Well, with that, we would like to open it up to Q&A, and let's have a conversation. I think we've got a nice group of people on here. Anna Hadley, do you want to kind of lay the ground rules for how we're going to moderate this and facilitate this, and get moving into questions?
Sure. And I wanted to point out that you can provide us a lot more feedback, please, so we can have it all documented and responses that are in more detail at this link that's on the website on the screen right now, the story map and questionnaire link. It's also on the Arapahoe County website that you can a little bit less directly go to that website and read more about this project, see the story maps, and find the questionnaire there as well. So those are two links. The first one a little bit more direct than the second one for your information. So please share that and follow up on it. The rest of the meeting, we wanted to hear from you and see if you had any thoughts, concerns, questions, while our team is fully available to you to ask some of those aspects. So you can enter that either into the chat box, or you can use the raise hand function that is on here, and then I'll call on you to share your thoughts. So if you find that, or you want to enter in the chat box, either way, we'll have a chance to respond to any questions, comments, or just hear your thoughts.
And it looks like, Anna, we have our first question in the chat box, and I think this is a great question for Shannon to answer, and it is, has the Arapahoe County Board of Commissioners expressed support for the renewal of the dedicated sales tax?
Sure. I'd like to go ahead and respond to that, and I can say with a resounding yes. As a matter of fact, as recently as earlier this afternoon, I was talking to the commissioners, and one of the goals is perhaps to really put it to the voters next year, as soon as next year, to be able to renew the sales and use tax. I think that all 5 commissioners are extremely excited about that prospect. They've always been extremely supportive of the program, the fair, the fairgrounds, the 17-Mile House Fall Festival, all of those things. And so, yes, we enjoy quite a bit of support, not only from our community, but also from the county leadership.
Thanks, Shannon. It looks like another question or comment that we got is about the east-west connectivity of the county. And so I think if we could just discuss how we have heard from the public and incorporated that into our priority areas about east-west trail connectivity and drainage connectivity.
Yeah, partly we're building off of, there's a bicycle and pedestrian master plan that the county has adopted. I forget the year of that, but it was a little while ago, 2017, it's on the screen. And so that's where some of these dashed lines are coming from, as those were proposed in that plan. So that's what we're showing in this. And what we've added to that is also thinking about what lands might need to be conserved around those to help create that continuity of wildlife corridors, or other ways that people can spend time in nature, and what that surrounding might be like. So that's partly what we're pulling ahead there. Chris, do you want to add anything else about these connections that are east-west?
I think that, I think aligning with the Arapahoe County pedestrian or bike and pedestrian plan is important. And again, the role that open spaces plays in that certainly is in potential funding for that. But again, are potentially picking up additional lands that protect a natural aspect of those areas. So yes, most of the drainage corridors are north to south. Ensuring that we do have east to west connectivity is important.
And I think if you could also maybe move to the conservation priority map, where we talk about wildlife habitat and how we are planning on maintaining the wildlife connectivity across those priority areas from east to west. The question is, how are we thinking of wildlife connectivity east to west, not just north to south?
Yeah, I'm not the Department of Wildlife expert on this, but we've consulted with them, and a lot of what they share with us is that the waterways are primarily where we're going to find wildlife habitat and where connectivity is most needed. And I'm sure Glenn can share more with us on that with Arapahoe County about those factors. So maybe I'll turn it out to him for a moment there. But certainly you're right. You're pointing out that the network isn't as much east-west. So if there's some thoughts or legislation shared, that'd be helpful.
Sure. With our conservation efforts, we are now focusing on large areas as well as these smaller tracts that we have access to for acquisitions. But combining our fee simple properties with partnerships through private land ownership, and that's where our conservation easements come into play and are important. So these large areas that serve as rest stops, places for wildlife to move through private property, have public areas or conserved areas to feed and breed and utilize those corridors north and south, but also to be able to move east and west as well. So these large tracts, especially the one in the center of the county, Bijou Basin, with its conservation easements, serve as islands for in between these private landowners. And these agricultural lands serve wildlife value as well. We can't forget that. And the private land plays a role in that as well.
Glenn, we also have another question in the chat from Kathleen about the provision for native trees in our open spaces. You want to talk a little bit about some of the efforts that Greg Pippis has done in regards to riparian area restoration and the willows and those types of plantings?
Sure. We have several staff on our open space and trails team that are natural resource specialists, and they've been working over the last several years to develop a number of restoration or reforestation efforts for our open space properties. These drainage ways that we've been looking at north and south require flooding, and some of them we've been trying to augment the natural ecological impacts of these floodwaters that come in and introduce young cottonwoods or other herbaceous species or shrubs. So we've been doing things with collecting and harvesting willows at the right time and using those in these rolls that they put out along drainage ways to help in areas where that natural process isn't keeping up, or maybe we had a flood event that cut a bank and we're trying to restore that bank. And then in our upland areas, our native grass areas, we've been collecting seed. We've done that with volunteers in partnership with other groups, and we're using and sharing that seed for work on our properties as well as properties that Aurora has as we come in from the Eastern Plains into the areas around our fairgrounds. But we are very conscious of using native ecotypes for restoration, whether that's live plant material or seeds.
Thanks, Glenn. Appreciate those responses.
Sure.
We have another question here about water rights and what steps the county would take to ensure that what water rights might you look at for considering in order to maintain the quality of land and parks acquisitions. So I think probably Shannon and Glenn, you've both encountered that one of you might want to respond to that question.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, a challenging project that Glenn has been working on and having completed is really doing an inventory of water rights, because in some cases we own certain water rights and we wells and those types of things. So we do keep an inventory of that, and sometimes we have to exercise it, and sometimes we don't. So Glenn, can you kind of respond to that?
Sure. Shannon, as Shannon mentioned, as we grew throughout the years since our inception, we've collected through our acquisitions a number of wells associated with our fee simple properties that we own. And so through that inventory that we did through Wright Water Engineers, we have this accurate assessment of where our wells are at, what they're capable of, what the water rights are, what we can use them for. And so we work with our lessees, especially in our agricultural properties, to maintain those rights and to utilize them for beneficial use. And we are often in conversation with the state engineer's office when we have questions, so that we're always compliant with state water law.
Thanks, Glenn. It looks like the next question that we have is around equestrian trails, and it is, what steps will the county take to ensure that developers provide multimodal trails and access to equestrians? So Anna or Shannon, I think either one of you could kind of take the first stab at that.
Yeah, I've been getting a lot of great input since this, especially from the survey process that we went through, about what people were looking for in trails, and equestrian trails and also support is one of those things that has come up we've seen some comments and write-in aspects. This next round of input we're looking for, we're hoping to get some more specifics. That's why we're having a focus group meeting coming up with those that have equestrian interests, is to get a little bit more down into the details of the specifics about what they're looking for and where, and how, if there are any conflicts and uses that we need to know about, but also, how to ensure that going forward, the future of equestrian use, it makes sense with all of the development that's occurred and connectivity that's needed. So there's a number of different aspects to balance, as we know, the next 10 years, looking at what the changes could be and how to best support that activity. So that's one thing that we certainly are hoping for in the survey comments that are in the questionnaire online to hear from folks, but also we're going to follow up with some specific stakeholders to learn some more about truly how people are experiencing the spaces that are equestrians and what they would like to see, what would best support their use. Shannon, anything from your standpoint?
Sure, I especially appreciate the point about, a number of our trails are actually developed by the people who build the houses. And they make a large development, and they include in their development process trails. And so for us to update our land use regulations to be able to say that as part of the requirement when they make regional trails or other types of trails, that they're soft surface, that they're equestrian friendly, that is something that I think can and should be included in our updates to our processes. So I think that's an excellent point, to try to connect some of these regional trails in an equestrian or equine friendly way.
Yeah. I see we have a question here that is, and a bit of a comment as well. It's an idea here of wanting to know if the plan already has planting flowers and other plants that attract native pollinators. in some areas like North Aurora, for example, is brought up as an example, in Littleton and Centennial, and how there's spaces that potentially that could be possible. And as far as the plan, so we don't have a draft plan out yet, but that will be coming out in the next few months. And these are the type of details that we'll be looking to work in as we see support and opportunities, and that it's really building off of the values that we heard from folks. So we'll be looking to do that. And I think helpful to us is if there are some particular places that you would say this would be ideal for pollinators and an opportunity. The questionnaire that's online is a great place for you to provide that input and be very specific about potentially locations or just ideas of who might be partners in that effort. So we really appreciate hearing those from you all. And perhaps Glenn has some thoughts about how that might already be supported or what the opportunities have been so far you might want to hit on.
Yeah, I would just mention our joint projects, our grant program. We partner with all of these cities, municipalities that are mentioned here in this question. And they, through their efforts, have been preserving open space. And within those open spaces, there's a lot of native plants, and those are very supportive of native pollinators. When I mentioned we do restoration work, a lot of it is focused on flowering plants that do support that. But through our partnerships, through grants, and in our joint projects, that's a great way for us to work in those areas that are within the municipalities to get these types of things in place and supported. But feedback on where those areas are would be great, that we could pass on to our partners as well.
Okay. You all have been so great about rapid fire questions. We've been able to just keep going here. I'm not seeing any more at the moment, but want to give you all a chance of if you want to either raise your hand to say anything or add anything else into the questions here.
And you will find in the chat box that link to the story maps and questionnaire that have been referenced. So you can just click on that hyperlink and be brought straight to the page.
Right, and please let us know if you have any challenges with it or further questions. There's an opportunity there that you can send an email off to get a response about any things that might come up on the website that need to be addressed. So we certainly appreciate you looking over all those maps and taking the time for additional feedback and interest. I see one more question here, a comment. As part of the Bike and Ped Master Plan, strategies and policies associated with trails, walking, and development was a focus and is being incorporated into the land use code updates. So I think that's Brian giving us that update of that piece happening and in the works. So certainly there's a lot of land use code and policy implications of that plan, the Bike Ped plan, as well as what this master plan will include. So that's how a plan that's a vision ends up with some teeth and direct actions. Okay. Well, I think we're maybe running to the end of why people joined us to hear a little bit more and any questions they had. So we certainly appreciate everyone taking the time tonight, listening into this presentation, as well as giving us some initial thoughts and feedback, and learning a little bit more about what this plan is about and what those next steps are.
Thank you for your attendance. We really appreciate the discussion. Excellent questions that you folks have posed to us. And again, we're available for any types of feedback. Just a reminder that there are other meetings that we'll be holding to try to get more input from once the draft plan is out and before we get adopted to the Board of County Commissioners. So this isn't the only opportunity you have to provide us with feedback. So, and we welcome it. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.